Hello everybody, my name is Taylor, and welcome to my quick, casual review of Rimworld. This is going to be a review that's not very scripted. I have a video of the first half an hour of gameplay going up behind while I'm talking, and I'm basically just going to be talking through whether or not you should buy this game and whether or not this game is for you. Who is this video for? It's for people who maybe are on the fence about purchasing this game for the first time because it just came out on Steam very recently, so I thought I'd talk about what this game actually is and show off some gameplay from it from people who might be even a little scared to start it up. Because this game is dense. It's a lot like the game Dwarf Fortress, and if you haven't played the game Dwarf Fortress, it's a really great game, but it's very hard to get into from a UI perspective. But this game is a lot more user-friendly in those regards. So when we load up into a world here, we're going to be picking where we're going to be landing. Because this game, if you had to describe it to somebody who has never played Dwarf Fortress before, or a game like Banished, it's a top-down, one-half survival, one-half base building, and one-half... They remind me a lot of a tower defense kind of game. So that's just when it comes to offense, but not every part of this game is about offense in the first place. So again, this game is going to take a lot of explanation because it's very dense. But whether or not you want to build a populace, a city, or anything like that, this game is for you. Now, $30 is a big ask for something like this. Rimworld is a game that I actually believe is worth the price of admission, and the reason for that is because it's one of those rare games that I keep coming back to. Now, why do I keep coming back to it? It's because there's so much to do and it tickles a really interesting part of my brain. Now, I've heard this game described as a work simulator before. The reason why it's explained in such a way is because this game involves a ton of micromanaging and managing of people. Now, a lot of people might not want to do that as their game. Maybe they just want to play a God of War where they get to just smash legions of people and feel like a total badass. Or maybe you want to play a racing game or a simulation game or something like that where you're a little bit more in the zone. But with this, it's more about guiding your people, making decisions, and building up your environment, which I'm actually a huge fan of. What is the plot? The plot is you are one of many survivors who have crash landed onto this planet. The planet is a rim world, I'm guessing on the outer rim of maybe the galaxy or what have you, and your pretty much job is to survive. Nobody's coming for you, nobody knows you're alive, so it's pretty much, that's the setup. Now, why is it sci-fi and not fantasy, or why is it set in this time and not any other time? I think it's interesting because you can have whatever type of alienistic monster you want, or you can actually have there are a bunch of just regular animals as well. It's a great mix between that. There's also a great use of actually medieval weapons as well. So our characters are going to start out with some guns as well as a knife. Sometimes you'll encounter raiders who only have like maces and stuff like that. So there's a great show off between these two stylings of weapons. So when you first start out a game, you're going to be pretty much setting up a colony. So what you're going to need to do first is set up a place for your guys to live. So you're going to need beds, you're going to need butcher tables, you're going to need all that kind of stuff to get started. And I'm not going to explain every single thing in every little detail because the game is very complex. This is not a tutorial series, it's more of a should you buy this kind of series. And yeah, so this is what the game looks like to start out with. But there's a lot more going on here. There are stockpiles, there are all sorts of stuff. And if this kind of tickles your fancy, then this is going to be the game for you. You can manual priorities on tasks that your people have to do. You can start trading with other societies in the world because you're not the only people on this planet. There are other people who have crash landed. There are natives to this world because humans apparently are everywhere in this universe. And you'll anger people, you'll befriend people, and hopefully you'll be able to do really well in this world. Now, when you're interacting with other societies, you'll have the chance to give them gifts and stuff like that, so you can make it so that they're not aggressive towards you, which I also find very interesting because you'll find that raiders will just come from pretty much all of the societies from around you, but you can kind of win them to your favor. But you're not just going to be encountering raiders from other societies, you'll also be encountering a lot of other types of enemies, aliens, and environmental hazards that you're going to need to deal with. Now, whether or not you're going to be fighting against raiders or environmental hazards has to do with the storyteller system. Now, this is an AI that will pretty much choose what happens to your society. Now, this has to do with which one you've chosen, and you might have seen me kind of pick the pretty much basic normal one, which is pretty much for a survival type of game. But you can also pick a storyteller who will not really give you that many environmental hazards, because you'll pretty much just be wanting to build up a base instead of having to fight against the elements or other types of aliens and stuff like that, which is really cool. There's a lot of different ways to play the game, and something that they've actually just introduced in the latest patch for the Steam version are scenarios. Scenarios are something that me as a longtime player, I'm really excited about, because scenarios pretty much enable you to start the game off however you want. So you can pretty much give your colonists whatever you want to start out. There are 3 pre-built scenarios. So the first scenario is the one that we've started out with, and that's the fact that we've crash landed on this planet. We are more advanced people. We know how to use technology, all that kind of stuff, and we also start out with a lot of stuff. The other scenario is you're one guy with a ton of resources, and you have to build pretty much your own kind of world, which is really interesting. From just you have a lot of stuff, but you don't have a lot of people for workforce, so that's really interesting. Whether or not you'll have to buy people and buy slaves, I'm not sure if you can actually buy slaves in this game anymore. I think you used to be able to, but now I can't really remember. I know that slavers will come by and try to buy up your prisoners, but that's something that is, again, a little bit later in the game. The last pre-built scenario is one where you actually play as tribespeople. So there's more than just your basic stuff. So the tribespeople use, instead of survival rations, they use pemmican. So I'm from Canada, and we actually learn about pemmican in our history classes because Aboriginal people used to eat pemmican before the advent of either overly salting stuff, or people used to use pemmican before there was proper ways to refrigerate your food. So when you load up onto a map, you'll see a bunch of stuff there. So you'll see animals, you'll see ship parts for building circuitry. Something that's very interesting is that you are going to need to find stuff to make circuitry, because in this game you're not just building firewood to work basic medieval stuff. You're actually going to be building some high-tech gear, so you're going to need both metal and circuitry to build that kind of stuff. The theme overall is very interesting because you're going to need to build power matrices, so you have to build solar generators so that you'll have enough power to actually be able to maintain your little society that you've built. And with that, you can actually build security turrets and more futuristic stuff. So as you can see, we're starting to build up what we need. So we have places for our guys to sleep. It's kind of in a really cramped hallway. Our survivors are not going to like that. And another really interesting thing, and something that I really like about this game, is that a big focus of it when this game first originally started out was you need to keep your colonists really happy. And what makes them happy? When you click on each individual character, you'll see their needs. Needs will kind of demonstrate what the characters each need to be happy and not suffer mental breakdowns. Mental breakdowns is one of the biggest problems that you're going to face, probably if you're not paying attention. Because if your characters go on mental breaks at the wrong time, like when raiders are coming, you could lose them and you would lose a very valuable member of your team. What makes people have mental breaks? Having them work 24/7, which I actually highly recommend doing for the first few days, but then switching it off later, because in the first few days you'll have to start building up your colony, getting everything that you need done absolutely done, because in the first few days you're going to need to be able to set up your base, your infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. And you have food, you're given food to start out with in the base scenario, but you don't have that much, so you're going to need to build up your base and a way to eat the food, which we have done with the nutrition paste dispenser and the hoppers. But we're going to need to find ways to generate food. And first of all, you're pretty much going to be reliant on either gathering berries and fruit and stuff from the local areas, or you're going to be hunting and I usually find that it's more common to hunt, which makes sense because it's relatively easy, but you don't want to do that until you have a butcher's table. There's so much to show off in this game that I'm not going to be able to go into everything and all the details, but one of the things that you should be paying attention to is that there's basic rules of life. So here, a big part of the game is survival, so things will go bad if you leave them out in the sun. Our survival rations will not, because again, they're survival rations and they're built to do that. But if you slaughter a creature and have their meat, the meat will go bad after like a few days, or like, I think like 5 or 6 days. So what you're gonna need to do is actually build refrigerators and stuff like that to keep your stuff preserved, which is a really interesting way to basically you have to build walk-in freezers, and you have to build power and all that kind of stuff. So it pretty much gives you something that you need to do, because you're not going to want to have to hunt your food all the time. You're going to want to have to build a stockpile, because I mean, much like the Starks say, winter is coming, and winter is one of the biggest things that you need to be prepared for, and one of the biggest driving forces towards building up your structure in the first place. You're not just doing it for shits and giggles, you need this to survive the winter. And how are you going to survive? You're going to need to build heating sources, you're going to need to build refrigerators to keep your food supply edible. And you're going to need to be able to stockpile enough food to last you throughout the winter. Like a squirrel, but that's how people had to do it, and that's the driving force, which I find very interesting, because the driving force is a natural force that people in our own societies had to have to build up their colonies in the first place. So to do that, we're going to need to set up some farming land, because that's one of the best ways to generate food, because you don't have to go very far. And another reason, one of the main reasons I actually love this game so much, is because it kind of demonstrates and shows the reason why people gathered together in the first place. So yeah, I think I want to talk a little bit about how I feel as a person who purchased the game a few years ago, and how it's advanced over time. As I mentioned before, there are updates relatively frequently. Usually Teenin, the developer, doesn't update it unless there's a big thing coming. So one of the more recent updates was allowing you to have animals and having them be close to you. I think that was a few months ago. It's relatively recent in the span of this, and the most recent update added situations that you could deal with. When I bought this game originally, I bought it a few years ago. There wasn't a ton of crazy stuff like that. There was a lot of stuff that's not in the game that has been added to the game since I've gotten it, and that has made my purchase feel even more justified. But when I initially bought the game, it was $30, and I remember being worried about the purchase, because I didn't know if it was going to be worth it. The reason I got it is because I actually love Dwarf Fortress, and people say, oh, it's a lot like that. I watched a few YouTubers playing it back in the day, and now I was curious about whether or not I should get it. And my purchase was justified. I feel like the thing is, when I bought it back then, I actually feel that it was worth it back then, and it's even more worth it now. The developer seems like very responsible. He keeps updating stuff. He doesn't intend on stopping anytime soon, and now that it's on Steam, it's going to get to a bigger and bigger audience. So he'll actually have more time to work on it as more and more people are buying the game. I think it's one of the top sellers on Steam right now, which is great to hear, because it's a game that I love very much, and it's a game that I hope succeeds. There are several versions of the games that you can buy from the initial startup thing, so it has a Kickstarter. It kind of has this interesting Kickstarter way of doing things. So you can buy the just version where you get the game, you can put your names into the game that other people will see. There's just a bunch of other things, so check that out if you're interested in doing that. It's not something that I personally do, but it's something that you might be interested in doing. But yeah, should you buy this game? I think this game is going to be very good for very specific people. For me, it's one of those games that I'm so glad it exists now, and it's one of the very few almost perfect games for me. Because it tickles a certain element of my brain that just likes to micromanage things, micromanage time, and micromanage people. It's just something that I personally like, and it fits my interests. But if that doesn't fit your interest, then you're not going to like this game. Much like any game, if you're interested in this kind of game, then you're going to like it. Out of all of the games that fit this kind of profile, I think it's one of the best by far. So if you're into games like Dwarf Fortress or Banished, or any colony simulation games, then yeah, I would say get this. In my opinion, this is one of my best of its kind. The artwork is very simple, but I think it actually lends itself to be simple. There's a lot of stuff that's going on, and you're not playing it for the artwork, you're playing it for the management parts of it. If you've played Dwarf Fortress, you're not going to mind the simplistic art style here. This is miles above that. So if you play Dwarf Fortress was initially was just literally like letters and numbers and stuff like that back when games were like that. So these types of games have never really focused on their survival elements, but this is something that's really good. The thing about Rimworld is that it looks very simple, but there's a lot of processes going on. The whole world is alive, so all of the creatures, all of the people are all being processed in real time. So I've actually heard people having troubles with it on smaller, less powerful computers. I have no problems with it, but I have a good gaming computer. I can run games at Ultra and still be fine. There's so many things to this game, and since I'm not doing a tutorial series, there's no way I'm going to be able to address everything. But this is what your basic colony is going to look like. You're going to need a food source. You're going to need individual places for your guys to sleep, because colonist happiness is very important to manage. You're going to want to make sure that all your colonists are happy and not going to suffer mental breaks. You're going to make sure you're going to want to eventually maybe farm some livestock. And to farm livestock, you're going to need food to give to them, or else your livestock will starve. A mistake that I made in an earlier playthrough was I was like, oh, I can buy fertilized chicken eggs from the local seller. Awesome, I'll buy like 50. I can afford 50, that's great. But the problem with that was I bought like 50 chickens for winter. I was like, oh, I'll have some chickens and they'll be able to provide some eggs. But the thing is, I ended up not having enough food to feed the chickens, and they ended up dying. And it was kind of a waste of food, money, and time. And they ended up eating a lot of the food that I gave to them, so it was just a big waste on resources. Which is an interesting story that came out of me not realizing that, wow, you can't have chickens unless you have an abundance of food to feed the chickens. I think this game has a really awesome way of making it so that you have value on resources. So food is something that you don't necessarily value all that much until you're low on it. Food is one of the most important resources in general, but if you have an abundance of it, you don't really have to worry about it. Silver, however, is the pretty much just regular currency that you're going to be using to sell with other traders. It's pretty much like gold, except you actually find gold a little bit later, but they don't use it as currency pretty much. So yeah, there's a lot to balance in this game, and I don't want to ramble on about it forever, even though I could, because there's just so much to it. So I think this is pretty much where I'm going to end off the video. I think I've described a lot of what makes this game really awesome. A lot of why, if you're thinking about it, I would definitely recommend getting it. I don't think there's going to be a Steam sale anytime soon on this game, as it's not fully out yet. I don't think the developer is going to put it on sale until it's fully released. And this game feels like it'll be officially out of its like beta mode or early access mode. I'm not really sure, because it's one of those live games that I'm not really sure when it's going to be done. It reminds me a lot of actually the original Dwarf Fortress. It's a game that I believe the developers are actually still working on, and this game is very alive, and I'm not sure when he's going to be done, but the game is worth the cost of admission right now, in my opinion, if this game is for you. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. The link to the Steam page where you can get this game is in the description, so click on that if you want to pick up the game. But until then, my name is Taylor, and I will see you guys next time.